Welcome to No Life Digital. We got an interesting topic for today, the new 2018 MacBook Pro. So let's take a look at them real quick. If you haven't seen them yet, they're pretty interesting. So if we look at the 13-inch version, which is, we're not seeing too many issues with the 13-inch version. There doesn't seem to be much controversy around it. And in my opinion, I think it's a pretty compelling option to purchase. I have a 13-inch non-touch bar 2016, 2017 version, and it's great. If you're someone who writes a lot, if you're someone who does light photo editing, you're someone who does web design or illustrating and stuff like that, it's such a great little mobile machine. The form factor is amazing, and now we finally have a version with quad core. So you get the 8th gen Intel, either Core i5 or Core i7, which is a quad core chip. You're still getting the low power DDR3 RAM in there, which isn't too bad. And nonetheless, you're getting the quad core, and you're also getting that new Retina display with True Tone, which is pretty cool. True Tone basically just changes the white balance a little bit depending on your ambient lighting. So where most of the controversy is coming from is the 15-inch version, which packs in the new hexa-core Coffee Lake chips. So you get the i7, which has a base of 2.6, and you also get the i9, which has a base of 2.9, and turbo boost almost up to 5 gigahertz, which is insane. You're also getting the DDR4 memory on here, which is not the low-powered version. So to compensate, they added just a bump in the battery for that extra little power draw. Again, this also has that True Tone display, and it's also using a new Radeon 560X with GDDR5 video memory in there. So it's a pretty beefy machine. When I first saw this, I was excited. I was like, damn, this is a laptop I would love to have. This is a pro machine. But of course, it turned out to be too good to be true. I knew that the i9 had thermal issues in laptops. We saw it in the XPS, most notably the XPS version, but pretty much any laptop that contains the i9 in a smaller sort of thin and light chassis is having thermal issues with it. The Razer Blade 15, which essentially screams like a vacuum with how strong the fans are, doesn't even use the i9. It uses the Core i7 version, the 8750H version, which is the other option that's that Apple uses as well. So it's seeming like this is the best option, is to get the i7 processor. It's a 6-core processor. It's got a base of 2.6. It's a very strong chip. You're getting about 20% performance increase over last year's version. So it's not a bad option. Personally, I would go with the i7, 32 gigs of RAM, and the 512 SSD. With cloud storage nowadays and external SSDs, there's no reason to spend $3,200 on a 4 terabyte SSD. Even though it is pretty quick, I don't think there's any reason to spend all that money on just a SSD. But the i9 is having all sorts of issues on all sorts of laptops. It's just too hot. It runs too hot. It has a 45 watt rated TDP, but that's Intel's rating on their TDP, and we know that their TDP ratings are very forgiving, right? We know that they tend to just overdo them a little bit, or underdo them. You know, it's definitely running hotter than 45 watts. This definitely needs a little bit more cooling efficiency there, and unfortunately, the MacBook Pro suffers. It's extremely thin. It's extremely thin. The fans in the MacBook are already on a conservative curve. So Apple doesn't like when your machine starts screaming and the fans just really pump. So they keep that fan curve very conservative. That way it stays thin and it stays light and quiet. And that's to its detriment, especially when you have the i9 hexa-core chip in there, just burning things up. And then you have the new DDR4 RAM in there, just adding extra heat, and also the Radeon 560X, which is going to generate much heat as well. And they're all running on that same one cooling block that Apple does. It's not like that crazy vapor chamber cooling system that Razer does, which is going to help cool things down both on the GPU side and the CPU side. And that's why I'm assuming that they're using the i7, because they just couldn't get it cool enough with the i9. Otherwise, they would have put the i9 in there. So it's a very interesting debacle here, and why would Apple even do that, right? Why would they put in a Core i9 processor, 6-core chip, if they know that it thermal throttles itself down to performance levels that match the i7? So you're not getting that i9 performance. You're basically getting the i7 performance. Well, this is my opinion. with their quality control, their QC, with their level of intense, rigorous testing that they do on all these laptops, they must have seen this coming. They must have knew the thermal issues were there, and they still didn't care. They still released that option. I don't blame them for releasing that option. Obviously, they're going to say, let's just give the people what they want. They want these new chips, fuck it. Let's just put them out there. We'll put them in a fucking chassis. We'll let that thing just burn up, and it won't get the performance it wants. You're still going to get a slight bump in performance just because of the higher bins on the chips, but you're not relative. It's not relative to the price, right? The price to performance is really bad on the i9, but they're going to give you that option anyway, because if they don't, well, then people are going to start screaming and crying. And the reason I think that they do this, the reason I think that they're putting this crazy ass, hot ass chip in this computer is because they want people to not get it. I really think that they want people who buy this laptop and don't get they want that to happen. And I'll tell you why. And it's because they're starting to get rid of Intel. So there's just tons and tons of news reports lately that have been saying Apple wants to put their own chips into their MacBooks. They want to start putting ARM-based chips in their MacBooks. They just don't want to be relied on Intel anymore. They want to be completely independent from anyone. They're still getting their screens for their fucking iPhones from Samsung. They're getting their chips from Intel. They're getting their GPUs from Radeon. They want to be able to produce all of this themselves. And we know that they're working on making their own display, so they're not relying on Samsung much longer. And now we know that they're going to be trying to produce their own chips, like a A12X Bionic CPU that's going to be used for an ARM-based MacBook. Also with the project, I think it's called Marzipan or something, Project Marzipan, where they're basically making apps that are both native to iOS but also work in MacBook in the same manner. So that leads me to think, okay, they're definitely going to start combining the two ecosystems, the iOS ecosystem and the Mac ecosystem, and they can do so if they have the same sort of processing power. If they're using the same chip, it just makes it so much easier for developers to create these type of Marzipan apps. And that's why I think they're putting this i9 in here. If they don't, then people are going to say, well, of course they're not going to, Apple always wants to hinder our performance. They never want to give us the best possible option in these laptops. So they say, you know what, we're going to give it to you, but we're also going to show you that Intel's chips are just inefficient. Intel is not innovating in the way that we want them to innovate. So we'll put them in there, but I guarantee you're going to want our chips as soon as we come out with them, because these Intel chips are running way too hot. They're not efficient, and they're basically just pre-binning all of these other chips to just drop the clocks down, because that's just the only thing that Intel knows how to do. They still haven't released that next architecture over, right? They're still having problems getting that new architecture out. Otherwise, I'm sure that they would have used a new architecture and things would have been fine with these laptops. But because these are the old architectures with Coffee Lake, basically just adding a couple extra cores on there, turning up the bass and turning up the boost, there you go. So Apple's saying, you know what? Let's just put them in there, and we'll get people to start thinking about more of this ARM-based ecosystem where both the MacBook, the iPad, the iPhone, the fucking iWatch, all of these things start to work together in tandem with each other. And that is when that happens, when Apple is able to do that. We saw that they're talking to TCMS, I believe, as well as a couple other chip manufacturers to look at more mobile-based CPUs being put into MacBooks and laptops like that. That's when I think we're going to start to see Apple really start to come back and to start really innovating again, because everyone's saying, look, we want a MacBook that has a touchscreen where we can use the Apple Pencil on it, but it's a MacBook. We want a 2-in-1 MacBook. We want a MacBook that has that top tier performance, like how the iPhone does, right? The iPhone, in terms of performance, is the top. It's the top of the top. There's no one that beats Apple's iPhone. We want that level of pro usability out of Apple again. Everyone's like, they keep forgetting about the pros. In my opinion, I don't think they're forgetting about the pros. I think that they don't exactly know how to cater to the pros in the way that they want to cater to them. They don't want to create a thick, 2-inch machine that sounds like a vacuum just to run a hot, inefficient chip. They want to be able to get to that point where their laptops are as thin as quarter of an inch, but puts out that performance that we expect out of Apple, like what's in the iPhone 10. and the new iPhones to come. So what they're doing is they're kind of stuck in this weird transitional period between just inefficient hardware, inefficient software, this really weird Frankenstein-like ecosystem where they're getting screens from Samsung, they're getting chips from Intel, they're getting GPUs from Radeon, they're just throwing them all together. Things aren't working the way they want, and this, I believe, I hope that this is the final iteration of that, because there's a lot of people who are upset with this, and I guarantee you the i7 probably throttles as well. It might not throttle nearly as bad, but I guarantee you it throttles, just because these Intel chips are running hot, and they're just not as efficient as they could be. They're not as efficient as they should be, right? They're not as efficient as they need to be. So this is where we're at. We're at a place where Apple is basically beholden to the hardware of others, and I personally believe that it's hurting Apple, and they know this, and hopefully that they're trying to work towards that next level with Project Marzipan. I think it's called Project Marzipan. I hope it is. Let me just double check. Yeah, it is Marzipan. I guarantee you, once that happens, everyone's gonna start praising Apple. Wow, they did it. They merged the two worlds together, right? And then we'll finally get the performance that we want from Apple. We'll get the software, the ecosystem software that we want from Apple. We'll get the prices that we want from Apple. They'll be able to start bringing those prices down because they're going to control everything in-house. And then we'll have that top-tier Steve Jobs Apple again. And Tim Cook, I don't think he's a bad CEO. I think he knows exactly. I mean, considering the limitations on the chips today, the memory today, the limitations on thermals today, the limitation on battery technology today, Tim Cook has done a pretty damn good job of keeping Apple at the forefront of technology, right? Apple is still very much at the top. I'm not sure if it's the best laptop manufacturer anymore. I'm not sure it's the best PC or desktop manufacturer anymore, but that's not really what they're worrying about right now, because they know that that market is just very discombobulated, right? They know that market is very weird, and it only accounts for, I think, like 5 to 10% of their actual market share or their actual market value. They're really worried about. They're looking at mobile. They're looking at dominating mobile. Everyone has an iPhone. Everyone has an iPad. Those are the two kings of the smartphone world, and in order for them to conquer that next step in the laptop and desktop version again, they're going to need to start innovating pretty heavily, and they can't do so right now because they don't have the chips, and they don't have the battery technology. They don't have the thermal efficiency that they want. So that's pretty interesting. In my opinion, if I'm going to recommend you a laptop today to buy that's very much like a MacBook, you're going to get you're going to get that performance that you want in a nice, good-looking chassis. I would say go with the Razer Blade 15. I would say that's probably the only competitor, in my opinion, especially at that price point, that will give you the performance that you want and then some, as well as maintain like a nice, sleek, thin, and light chassis. You could also go with the XPS, but that has thermal issues as well. You could go with a few other options like MSI's laptop, but that one kind of looks a little janky. The Razer's pretty much... The Razer is Windows' version of the MacBook, and when I saw that that there was an i9 in here, I was gung ho. I was gonna go and fucking sell the one that I have now and pick this version up. But after hearing about all these thermal issues and just seeing the direction that Apple is in right now, or seeing the direction that Apple is going right now, I think I'm going to skip that and get myself a Razer Blade 15 as soon as the 4K option's available. The 4K option is the one with 100% Adobe RGB, and that's another thing too. These aren't true 4K displays, right? Razer's killing it. They have they're going to have a true 4K display option with an NVIDIA GTX 1070 in there, the Core i7 8th gen processor, which has 6 cores in it. This is the pro machine that I think everyone is looking for. Unfortunately, it just doesn't run Mac OS. Right, that's the only thing. If it ran Mac OS, then I'd have one right now, but it doesn't. So, jumping from ecosystem to ecosystem hasn't been difficult for me because I do live in both worlds. I live in the Apple world mobily with my laptops, my iPad, my iPhone, everything else. But desktop world, it's Windows all the way. There's just the performance doesn't compare, and this might be the time I go back to Windows, because I do want a mobile workstation. That's sort of something that I need right now, since I do go from here to my office a lot. But this is a pro machine. This is a pro machine. I really wish Apple would be able to create something like this. You know, this is a pro machine in my opinion. You're getting just massive amounts of performance. Sure, does it get hot? Yeah, hell yeah, it gets hot. Is it loud? Hell yeah, it gets loud with those fans. But the performance you're getting out of it is just unrivaled. It's unrivaled, and it looks great. It's a great looking laptop as well. This is not one of those, you know, really ugly Chinese made laptops. This thing looks really, really good. So yeah, I think I'm gonna get myself a Razer Blade 15. I'm gonna skip this version of the MacBook this year. Hopefully in 2019 we see, I don't know if we're gonna see a new version of a MacBook, to be honest. Maybe if Intel is able to get their asses in check and to be able to put out a more efficient chip, they're gonna get that next. They're gonna make that new architecture, and we're gonna get the performance we want as well as the cooling efficiency that we want. Then I'll probably go back to MacBook. But until then, I just don't think it's worth it right now. I just don't think it's worth it right now. You're just not gonna get the performance that you want. Now, if you're a Final Cut user, that's the worst part about it. I've been using Final Cut a lot, and I love Final Cut, and it's so much faster than Premiere. Premiere sucks. In terms of like a workstation, it's not bad when you have the raw power to use it, but it sucks. It's just inefficient. It's clunky. It's big. It's bloated. The files are bloated. They don't look as good. Final Cut is extremely awesome. But unfortunately, right now, I mean, you're not getting the most that you can out of it, basically, because these chips are just, they're not being cooled efficiently. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like and also subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and make sure you hit up our Instagram at NoLifeDigital, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.